Welcome, everybody, to an episode of the Weird Gears interview series brought to you by the Uddering Engineers, a podcast hosted by the University of Calgary's Engineering Student Society. As always, I'm Eric, and that's Shivak. Oh, this way, I guess. That's Shivak. And today, I'm actually super excited to have one of my good friends and I guess partners in crime, um, here on the show today. We're actually co-chairing an upcoming conference on diversity in engineering at University of Calgary, which is super, super cool. And her name is Jasmine McDermott. Hi, Jasmine. How's it going?
Hey, how are you?
Doing excellent. I've been so excited for this episode. Like from the start when we talked about doing interviews, like your name was the first one to come up and we've been just super stoked to do this.
That's hilarious. Thank you.
Yeah, we decided we'll try to get kind of decent at this before we talk to you. That's why we waited a little bit and then we're like, okay, we're super pumped now. Let's do it.
Well, I'm so honored that you invited me and thought of me, so thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Sweet. So I think can you start maybe by just introducing yourself to everybody that's listening in?
Yeah, so like you guys said, my name's Jasmine, and I just finished my third year of mechanical engineering at the Schulich School of Engineering. So um, I started engineering 3 years ago, and it's been fantastic. I don't know what else you want to know, but feel free to ask follow-up questions.
We definitely will. Otherwise, this podcast is going to get really boring on our end. I mean, on the listener's end is what I meant by our. Um, but Jasmine, I think Eric and I have both interacted with you quite a bit over the years. So aside from CDE, what kind of stuff have you been involved in on campus?
Well, so I came to U of C and I didn't know anyone at who was going to the University of Calgary. So in high school, actually for all of my grade school, I was homeschooled. So all my friends kind of went different places, different schools, kind of had their own paths, and none of them happened to be U of C engineering. So I was all alone, big school, 800 incoming students. I knew no one, and I was terrified. So I did what anyone would do and I joined ESS. And it was fantastic. I tried out to be a first year rep. And I'm pretty sure in first year that's when I met like Shavak and Eric. And so I was accepted, which was fantastic. And through that, I got to develop like a lot of leadership skills, um, learn about like how do student clubs work, how do you manage a really big organization and be accountable for a lot of money and people and initiatives. So I loved that in first year. It was just kind of a lot of watching all the cool upper years do things and being like, wow, I didn't know we could do that. Um, so what I really like about ESS is if you like have an idea to do something, you can do it. So it's really fun. You get to be creative. So at the end of my first year, I ran for vice president academic and I won. So I was vice president academic in my second year. And then in my third year, I was our diversity commissioner. So that's a role I suggested we create at our annual general meeting, I guess, 2 years ago now. So I had a lot of fun doing that in my third year. And also in second year, Eric and I submitted a bid to co-chair the Conference on Diversity in Engineering for the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students. And that's another great organization that I also got involved in through ESS. I've been to a lot of their conferences, so I went to Congress, which is like their annual like engineering leadership conference, and then also several conferences on diversity in engineering. So that's also a cool way. It's like my first time managing or co-managing such a big initiative. So that's been cool. And also through going to those conferences, I got to learn about current issues. So I remember I was in first year and it was like January, so like end of first semester, and I was in a session at a CFES conference about diversity in engineering, and I remember someone in the room asked, "What about Indigenous people and issues in engineering?" because there's a lot of First Nations who don't have access to clean drinking water. There's housing issues. There's a lot of engineering related problems in Indigenous communities that are very close to home, close to these big cities where we live. And I remember sitting in the room being like, oh my God, like, that's me. Like, I'm Indigenous and I'm an engineer, and someone's asking this question, and the room is totally silent. Nobody is saying anything. These are like leaders from across Canada in a diversity panel, and nobody has anything to say at all about uh, issues facing Indigenous people in Canada and
Wow.
what role engineers have to play in that. Um, so that was my like aha moment in first year where I was like, oh, this is so cool. This is why I'm here, you know. And so I hadn't thought about that before. Like so for some background, my grandpa is Cree. He's from Sawridge Cree First Nation, which is in northern Alberta, kind of near Slave Lake. That's on my dad's side, and then my dad's mom is German. And then on my mom's side, her mom is Polish and her dad is Ukrainian. So all my European grandparents came over to Canada as small children. And then my grandpa, who's Cree, is like a 60s group survivor, so he was raised in foster care. And basically, as a result of different policies and actions put in place by the Canadian government historically, like he didn't grow up with a connection to his culture. So, like, I guess I knew I was Indigenous, but I didn't think about it. And I feel like that moment kind of caused me to start thinking about it. So that's always like the thing I point to that was like a turning point in my degree.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's always just taking those opportunities and traveling and meeting so many different people all over Canada with all these different like perspectives, and just I'm glad that's where you found the spark. But so we do know that I guess Shivak and I know based on like the other stuff you've done too that you're also starting a club because of this, inspiration you got. Could you tell us more about that?
Basically, I came home, I was talking to other people at the conference and finding out what other people are doing, and I was like, I need to learn more. So I applied for funding to go to the Assembly of First Nations National Water Symposium. And I thought that was a really, really, really cool opportunity because it was people in industry, people who work for nonprofits, people who work for government, people who are leaders at the various different First Nations across Canada discussing what are the issues facing Indigenous people in Canada from like, and these are engineering issues, right? Having access to clean drinking water. So for me, it was kind of cool to kind of learn. That was the first time I had heard Indigenous voices talking about engineering issues, and it just gave me a lot of background. And I was like, we have to do more, right? So um, initially, I was like, this is it. We're gonna start a student club, and we're gonna like solve all the drinking water issues in Canada. Um, First year enthusiasm is quite wonderful. I hadn't taken a few courses that beat you down a little bit by then, but I just kept learning. I went to an organization called CISSA, which is the Canadian Indigenous STEAM Students um, Science and Engineering Society. I went to one of their conferences. I went to an Indigenous STEAM conference, and what I found was before I came to engineering, I thought like, and before I went to these conferences and got to kind of sit in and join these communities, I thought my family's like history and story was really weird. I was like why doesn't my grandpa want to talk about his experiences growing up and how he feels as an Indigenous person in Canada and about like the hardships him and his family went through. Like I thought it was weird that my family didn't talk about those things, and I was like, this is so strange, and I felt like it was like something was wrong with like me and my family. But what I found when I went to these conferences was that a lot of people are in that situation where because of like the intentional steps the Canadian government has taken to basically commit genocide against Indigenous people, that these deliberate actions have resulted in what we're seeing today and what people like me struggle with, where it's like, okay, I have this card from the government that says I'm Indigenous, but like, what does that mean and how do I reconcile and basically take back um, the culture and the traditions and the values and the systems that have been lost, right? So I feel like by going to those conferences, I kind of was like, it made me feel less bad and more like this is actually like a special place to be in, to try and be in the middle of two worlds and two systems and try to work kind of in that middle ground to make things better, because basically what we're seeing with the issues faced by Indigenous communities is that engineering isn't effectively serving Indigenous people. We're not sustainably designing or developing or implementing technology in Indigenous communities, and yeah, so it was just so cool for me to like see that and like to feel like seen and heard, and also have mentors who were Indigenous and were engineers and were successful. It was kind of just like an aha moment for me, and I really wanted to bring that back to the school, because that is definitely something I didn't feel at the school. I always felt like when I was at Schulich, I was an engineering student, and I felt like I belonged as an engineering student, and I felt like when I would go to the Writing Symbols Lodge, I was an Indigenous person and I belonged as an Indigenous student, but I never felt like I belonged as an engineering student at the Writing Symbols Lodge, or I belonged as an Indigenous person in engineering. So I think taking a few steps back and kind of reflecting on my own experiences and recognizing that like I still have a lot to learn and I have to also do the work of decolonizing myself. Um, Basically, I kind of started with the help of other students, other mentors, other people who are passionate about this or even might not know as much but were still like really willing to like listen and help out however they could, with so much help and so much guidance and so much moral support and so much Jasmine, please don't give up, please don't give up, please don't give up. We founded this club, so it's called the Calgary Indigenous STEAM Students Association. Um, so basically, the purpose of this club is to bring together a group of people who are in this space, who are pursuing like these technical fields, so science, technology, engineering, arts, math, and who are Indigenous, as well as non-Indigenous allies, and basically kind of create a support system where, kind of like I experienced at those conferences, you can feel seen and heard and know you're not the only one. And I think that strengthens us as individuals, that if someone's asking us something that really isn't appropriate for them to be asking us as students, that we can kind of feel like it's okay to just be an Indigenous STEAM student and to have that support network. So we want to do like cultural events, social events, have a mentorship program, also professional development, academic development, things like that. Also, there's a lot of interest in applying what we're learning in school to help out however we can. So whether that's working with communities to do like volunteer work or just outreach to people who might be considering coming to engineering or STEM or STEAM but haven't actually applied to the school yet. So there's a lot of work to do in this space, but I think it's like I'm just really excited to kind of have a group of people together, both who are Indigenous students or Indigenous people in the community, and also non-Indigenous people who are allies as well. So it's just been great to kind of get this group together. We just registered this summer with the SU and we were approved. So we're planning an event for Orange Shirt Day, which is raising awareness about residential schools on September 30th. And we're just kind of doing all that stuff to get a club up and running. It's way more work than I thought it would be, but it's really rewarding. So.
Well, first off, congratulations on getting the club through and having it up and running. It's, yeah, like you're saying, it's a ton of work, but it's good work. I know he told me about like you starting this club or working towards this club a while ago, and I've been excited. Like, I'm not Indigenous, but I've been excited to see this come to fruition for a while now. Like, I'm so glad it's actually happening. Like, I'm so glad you're spearheading it too. Like, if anybody was to spearhead it, that I, at least in my like circle or my network of people, I'm so glad that you're doing this. because yeah, just good people. But that all being said, I have a question that might not be directly related. But is there funding? Is there, you guys have enough like financial support to get this thing going, or like run events or that kind of stuff?
So for us, we're developing our sponsorship kind of strategy now, and I guess what's unique to starting a new club, right, is you don't have those historical events and statistics to point to that you would generally include in a sponsorship package. But we have been approached by actually several companies saying they are interested in sponsoring us, and I know there are different funding sources available through the university that we're also looking into. So it is definitely like a process for us to establish that and look into that. Um, but we have some leads we're following, and definitely I think there's the good thing about kind of having worked on this kind of throughout my degree over the years and kind of building, I guess, like that support network is now when I say, oh, like this is the club, they kind of like know what we're talking about and what our goals are because we've been working towards it for a while, and we've kind of been able to build a level of that trust that they know we're like really committed to this. And then we're just continuing to work on that going forward. So I guess for us is kind of deciding what the best sponsorship strategy is. I think we're kind of looking at it two ways, where we can kind of go an event by event basis.
Right.
Right. Since we're starting out, maybe I'll have to pick your guys' sponsorship brains after this. I know you guys are much more professional than me at this.
No, I was just curious. Okay, so I'll give a bit of a background of like why I was thinking of that question, because I know for some clubs I've been a part of, like Southeast Asian clubs or like other clubs, there's like grants and like funding available for those kinds of communities, like an established resources for them. But I don't know if that's available for Indigenous clubs or organizations. That's why I was curious if you guys have funding. It was not so much about the sponsorship, but it was more about that. So I should have been a little bit more clear on my end.
No, that's okay. We have an Excel sheet that just like where we throw all the opportunities we see. So if you guys or anyone listening has ideas for us to throw in there, let us know because we're still figuring it out. There's not a lot of Indigenous SU clubs on campus. I think, to my knowledge, there's three. So there's us, there's the Indigenous Student Circle, and then also an Indigenous Law Club as well. So
Wow.
um, yeah.
And if somebody wants to get involved in your club or help support your club, are there avenues to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, we're open to anyone, even if you're not a current undergrad student, you can still join us. Basically, anyone can join us, and the way to do that is to email our either me, so you can find me basically on the internet, or email me or whatever. I'm pretty easy to find, I think,
Yeah.
but you can also email communicate our communications vice president, so it's like communications.cissa@gmail.com. So lots of ways you can kind of reach out to any of us, and we will grab you and pull you into our family.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the big things, like one of the reasons you started the club, is to be more involved and to learn more. So do you have any, tips for other undergraduate students in engineering, like to get involved? Like what's the best way to get more involved and do more for Um, okay, I'm gonna start that again. Okay. So I guess one of the big reasons you started your club is to get more involved and to learn more and to be more active in the engineering Indigenous community. So I was wondering, what would you say is the best way for other students who might be interested to get involved, like other than joining your club, which they definitely should.
I think I think everyone's journey is different. For me, it has been a very personal journey, and I feel like I don't know, when you're like in first year and you're like, I just want to make everything happen and I want to download everything into my brain. You just want it to just like happen for you. But I found that hasn't been the case for me, and a lot of that is there's like a lot of like emotional baggage and things to kind of like unpack and work through, right? Because I think something that people don't always realize, um, sometimes people very well meaningly, I've been guilty of this as well, actually, kind of like look to other Indigenous people um, to educate them about these issues, like as educators. And I think it's actually a hard position to be put in as an Indigenous person because, or at least for me, because you're not just talking about history or about like current political issues or current laws or current actions or inactions by the government. You're talking about like the reason some of your family members are dead or have all this trauma and like the reason your parent is the way they are and like the reason like it's very complex and so I think it's something as either Canadians or people who are living in Canada who are on Indigenous land kind of need to take the time kind of like to reflect on a personal level like what has happened in the past, what has happened now. And so I think a really good step is just to educate yourself. I feel like for me it's a journey because I read something or I sit in a talking circle and I hear something or I go to a conference and I learn from like a leader in the community and it's just like so much to like unpack and sort through and it's so overwhelming and it's basically at least for me like it's unlearning a totally different system, right? Because you have a Western perspective and you have an Indigenous perspective, and they're both like completely different worldviews and systems. And where we have a lot of these problems is we try and take an Indigenous system and we try and fit it into a Western system, and then we wonder why it doesn't work. And in reality, I mean, neither system is necessarily like inherently bad or broken or anything like that. It's just I think if you don't take that step back and kind of realize kind of that perspective, it's really hard to move forward in a good way. So I always encourage people to kind of like take the time on their own to like research and listen. You know, the university through the university as students, there are a lot of programs and ways to like get involved. People host events. You can also do register for like something called a blanket exercise at the Writing Symbols Lodge, which basically like is an interactive teaching exercise to learn about the history of Indigenous peoples in Canada and like the land that we're on. Um, a lot of like I think U of A offers a free course about Indigenous people in history. So I definitely encourage people like as you're able and as you have the emotional space to kind of do it to try and learn as much as you can and then I think that kind of informs it's empowering and it kind of informs the way you can interact with Indigenous people better and it kind of helps you to kind of maybe understand what responsibility you have as an engineer, right? Because as engineers, if you think about the reason engineering exists, we're here to serve people. um, Engineers take science and technology and we apply it to meet the needs of humanity. And what's really important for me as an engineer is to think about how is my engineering actually effectively doing that. And I think if you look at, I know we talk about sustainable development a lot, but it's really important to kind of think about is what we're doing sustainable for all people who are on this land? Are we forgetting about people? How are we interacting with people? So, for example, um, I've seen a lot of times people talk about Indigenous people as a topic as opposed to talking to Indigenous people as people. So I think something that's really important to keep in mind as you're working on this land, which is Indigenous land, is to think about you never want Indigenous people to be a topic that is being discussed. You want Indigenous people to be people who you're talking to. So for me, I think that's just something like that's important to keep in mind. And I've been rambling for a really long time, and I forgot what your question was.
No, I think that was perfect. It was just like how to get involved, and it's not as like there's no easy way, I guess. There's no like, here is like a how to, get more involved book or anything. It's, it's not just a topic, it's people. And yeah.
It's one of those things, right, where um, this is an issue that that is hundreds of years old. It's an issue we're not going to solve overnight. Inherently, the relationship between Indigenous people and settlers is broken, and there's a lot of problems, and we see the result of those problems. So I really wish I could tell you an easy fix, but I think the best first step is to learn, to do some learning, watch some videos, read some articles, read some books. I think it's important to read resources that are by Indigenous people. So thinking about the perspective that you're learning from, to really try and hear those Indigenous perspectives told by Indigenous people. Um, but yeah, that's like the biggest thing. It's just like to learn, and I think being like at U of C, at Schulich, um, there's a lot of events at school you can go to, and I think that's the best first step.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the best analogy, but it's kind of like coming up to somebody and being like, hey, can you give me an encyclopedia about just your life and you so I can just learn everything quickly and then let's figure this out? Like, that doesn't happen, right? You can't just get all the answers about anyone, really. So how can you expect that from an Indigenous person or people?
Yeah, and I think it's hard too, right? Because um, when I'm telling you about Canadian history, if I'm telling you about the 60s scoop, I'm telling you about how my grandpa and his siblings weren't allowed to speak their language. My grandpa was told that he wasn't Indigenous. He was told that he was German because his foster family was German. So he wasn't allowed to speak he didn't have anyone in his life to teach him like his language or his traditions, his culture. Um, and so he spoke German. He had to be like an altar boy in the Catholic Church, and he would go to school and get bullied because he was like visibly, clearly Indigenous. And then he'd come home and get told like, "Oh no, you're white," and "No, you're German, and this is your name," and things like that, right? And then you kind of, I guess, all the other problems that kind of come along with that, and everyone's experiences are different. Some people are really badly abused, some people get off less traumatized than others, I guess. But either way, it's just a lot. And then so for me to talk about that, I'm telling you about how like my grandpa's personal trauma and then like how that affected his relationship with my dad and how that affects his relationship with us kids and like how that it's so messy and it's a lot. It's overwhelming, but I think it's really encouraging that like we're having these conversations and people are starting to think more critically about these things. And I think if you're asking, how can I learn more? How can I get involved? I think that's really great. And I'm happy to share what I can, even though I feel like it's not much, but I am happy to. And it's good. It's encouraging. So thank you.
Now, on that note, I'd just like to say thanks again, Jasmine, for coming and speaking to us. Um, I really enjoyed this interview, and I don't know if our viewers slash listeners could tell. I was very silent because I was very like focused on that. So again, thank you for speaking to us about this. And honestly, I'd love to have you back on the podcast to speak about other things that interest you, other topics, or even this topic to keep it going. I'm sure you have more to talk about. I have more questions, that's for sure. But just because the podcast is supposed to be a specific time, I think we're gonna have to try to wrap things up. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your personal stories. Like, it was really cool, and I hope it also, people listening will be inspired to, when you have that aha moment, just go for it. It's that's I guess another cool lesson too.
Everything you're doing ties together, right? Like all the skills, like being on ESS made it easier for me to go to these conferences. The skills I learned on ESS, co chairing this conference, those are skills I apply to this club I'm starting. So I think it just speaks to how great and important it is to get involved and to be involved with great organizations and great people. And like, I've met so many people like yourselves and also others who have like mentored me and helped me know how to do this in a good way. So I think it's great, and I think as engineers, we're in a great position to be involved with this. And I think it's also part of our responsibility as engineers to be aware of this and to be thinking about this. So I'm glad we're starting this conversation. I hope it continues for a long time because I think it's really important.
Awesome. And I do want to be clear here. ESS is great, and this is a podcast that's hosted by ESS, but it's not the only way to be involved, and it's not the only way to learn some of those skills. It's more about it's about what you're interested in. And I think we've touched on that topic before. But that being said, this is a great time for me to plug in all of our social media for ESS. So if you guys have any questions, concerns, you want to continue talking about this topic, or even just want us to ask questions to Jasmine, forward questions, you can find us under U of C ESS on Facebook. If you just go to Instagram and also search up ufc.ess, you should be able to find us there as well. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can shoot us an email on those. You can find us on social media. You can bug us a little bit, and we should be able to get back to you as soon as possible. We really want to hear from the listeners. We're, again, trying to get better at this, and we want to have interviews with people that you want us to speak to. Awesome.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. This has been the Weird Gears interview series with Jasmine by the Uddering Engineers and University of Calgary Engineering Student Society podcast.